They thought they could bury my creek under concrete to build their fancy walking trail. But water doesn't follow HOA rules. Now their million-dollar homes are sinking into a swamp, and the same neighbors who once mocked me are begging for mercy. The creek had always been more than just a stream of water to me. It wound its way behind the tree line like a silver thread, bubbling after rains, trickling quietly in summer, always alive. My father used to say that the creek was the neighborhood's lifeline, though most people never noticed it. It carried the storm water out to the river, kept our basements dry, and gave the kids a place to chase frogs in spring. Deer came down at dusk to drink, and in winter the surface sometimes glazed over in a fragile sheet of ice that reflected the pale moonlight. I'd lived near it for 20 years, and I knew every bend, every willow leaning over the water. So when the HOA began whispering about beautifying the subdivision, I had a bad feeling. I wasn't on the board, though I'd been asked a few times. I never wanted the politics. But the president, Karen, loved politics, loved power even more. She was the kind of woman who wore pearls to yard sales and reminded everyone that her husband was a corporate lawyer. She had a way of smiling that wasn't really a smile, more like she was tolerating the rest of us until we caught up to her vision. I didn't even hear about their plan until the notice went out for the monthly meeting. The flyer said something about proposed landscaping improvements. I almost didn't bother going, but something in the pit of my stomach told me to show up. That night, the community hall was fuller than usual. The folding chairs creaked under the weight of the curious and the nosy, and at the front stood Karen with a glossy poster board propped on an easel. She tapped it with her manicured nail as the chatter died down. Thank you all for coming. Tonight, we unveil our plan to enhance our property values and make our neighborhood the envy of the county. The poster showed a drawing. Where the creek ran, there was a straight concrete walking path lined with flowers, benches, even a little wooden bridge purely decorative, not functional. The creek itself was gone, replaced with something that looked like a park advertisement. I felt my chest tighten. Karen continued, "That unsightly ditch behind our homes has been a nuisance for years. It's overgrown, muddy, and dangerous for children. With our plan, it will be transformed into a scenic greenway where families can walk safely." I stood up. "That's not a ditch. It's a creek. It handles all the stormwater runoff. If you fill it in, you'll cause flooding." A few heads turned, but Karen just smiled. "Sir, thank you for your concern. But our landscaping committee has consulted with contractors. They assure us small drainage pipes will suffice. That creek carries thousands of gallons during storms," I pressed. "Those pipes will clog or overflow. You'll be putting every house downstream at risk." There were murmurs. A man in the back said, "I've seen that creek rise right to the edge of my yard." But another neighbor, one of Karen's allies, shook his head. "Come on, no one wants to stare at mud and mosquitoes. Property values are what matter." Karen seized on that. "Exactly. This improvement will raise all our values. Think of the buyers attracted to a community with a beautiful greenway rather than a swamp." I wanted to scream. It wasn't a swamp. It was functioning, alive, necessary. But I could see where this was going. Karen called for a vote. Hands went up, mostly hers and her friends. A few abstained. I was one of the only no votes. "The motion passes," she announced smugly, tapping her gavel. "Construction will begin next week." I walked home in a haze of anger. That night, rain began to fall, and I watched the creek swell in the moonlight, rushing strong and purposeful. Did no one else see it? Did no one understand that it wasn't just mud to be paved over? A week later, the trucks came. I woke to the rumble of diesel engines and the squeal of brakes. When I stepped outside, the air smelled of wet cement. A cement mixer backed slowly toward the creek, men in hard hats guiding it. Another truck carried stacks of concrete slabs. "Morning," one worker said casually as I approached. "You live here?" "Yeah, and that's not a ditch you're pouring into. It's a natural drainage creek. You're going to flood these houses." The man shrugged. "We just do what the contract says. HOA paid us." I stood there helpless as the chute swung out and gray sludge began to gush into the flowing water. It hissed and bubbled as it hit, clouding the current, smothering it. The sound was like a throat being clogged. Neighbors stood around watching, some nodding approvingly. "It's going to look so much nicer," one woman said, holding her little dog. I hated looking at that muddy mess. I clenched my fists. You'll hate it more when your basement's underwater. But no one listened. Karen arrived, sunglasses perched on her head, clapping her hands. Beautiful, isn't it? Out with the old, in with the new. I wanted to shout at her, shake her until she understood. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. If they wouldn't listen now, maybe they'd listen when the water came. Day after day, the work continued. They dug trenches, laid 2 small PVC pipes, poured concrete until the creek was buried under a straight, sterile path. Grass sod was rolled out over the edges, benches bolted down. By the end of the month, the creek was gone. In its place, a cheerful little trail ribboned through the neighborhood like a stage set. But to me, it was a corpse. The first storm came sooner than expected. A warm front clashed with cold, and thunder rolled across the sky one evening. By midnight, rain pelted the roofs so hard it sounded like hail. I didn't sleep. I sat by my window, watching sheets of water cascade down the street toward where the creek used to be. At first, the new pipes handled a trickle. Then the flow increased, brown water rushing. The pipes shuddered, strained, then clogged with branches and debris. I could hear the water sloshing against the concrete, searching for escape. It found it. By 2 a.m., water pooled on lawns, creeping across driveways. By 3, it poured down basement steps. I saw lights flick on in windows, heard voices shouting. A car alarm wailed as water lapped its tires. I stepped onto my porch. My house sat slightly higher, just enough to stay dry. Across the way, neighbors splashed frantically in knee-deep water, trying to push it away with brooms. Children cried inside as parents scrambled to lift furniture. The walking trail was invisible now, swallowed under a brown, surging lake. I leaned against my porch railing, heart heavy but grimly vindicated. This was only the beginning. The morning after the storm, the neighborhood looked like a disaster zone. Mud streaked the sidewalks, waterlogged trash floated in yards, and the air reeked of wet carpet and mildew. From my porch, I watched as families dragged ruined belongings onto their driveways, sofas dripping like giant sponges, cardboard boxes collapsing in sodden heaps, mattresses sagging with dirty water. The so-called walking trail was a wreck. The concrete surface buckled in places where the water had forced its way out, leaving jagged cracks like scars. The sod they'd laid was torn up and strewn in clumps, plastered against fences. And the pipes? Buried somewhere beneath, clogged solid. I walked down to check on the damage, camera in hand. Every few steps I snapped a photo. Water lines stained on garage doors, ruined flooring stacked at the curb, angry homeowners shouting at one another. Karen's house had taken the brunt of it. She lived closest to the low point, right where the creek once carried the runoff. I found her in her driveway, barking orders at 2 workers pulling soaked boxes out of her garage. "This is unacceptable," she snapped, clutching her phone. "The HOA is not liable." "Do you hear me? Not liable." "Not liable?" I said, loud enough for her and her little audience to hear. "Karen, you filled in a natural drainage creek. What did you think would happen?" Her head whipped around, eyes narrowed. "This isn't the time, sir. We were hit with an unprecedented storm. No system could handle that much water." I laughed bitterly. "That creek handled storms like this for decades. You killed it. And now your $1-million homes are sitting in a swamp." Some of the neighbors shifted uneasily, glancing at each other. They wanted someone to blame, and my words made too much sense. A man shouted from across the street, "Karen, my insurance won't cover flood damage. They said this wasn't a natural disaster, it was negligence." "That's ridiculous," Karen shot back, though her voice cracked. I kept walking, documenting. One family was crying over ruined photo albums, pages sticking together in soggy clumps. Another man cursed as he pulled out warped hardwood boards from his living room. Every house on the low side had been gutted. The following week, the HOA called an emergency meeting in the community hall. The room was packed, tension crackling in the air. People still smelled of dampness, their clothes carrying the faint odor of bleach from endless cleaning. Karen sat at the front, gavel in hand, her usual poise fraying at the edges. "Order," she called, though no one listened. Voices rose, angry, desperate. "You ruined our homes." My basement's destroyed! Who's going to pay for this? Karen banged the gavel until the sound echoed like gunshots. Quiet, please! We are addressing the situation. The board has been in touch with contractors about repairs. Repairs? Someone cut in. You mean more concrete? More pipes? Are you insane? The crowd erupted again. I stood near the back, arms folded, waiting for my moment. Finally, Karen raised her voice. This was an unusual historic storm. No system could have prevented flooding. That's a lie! I shouted, stepping forward. The room fell silent. The creek always handled storms like that. You filled it in, and the water had nowhere to go. This isn't an act of God, it's an act of stupidity. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few people even clapped. Karen's face reddened. You are not on the board, sir, and you do not speak for this community. No, I said, but I speak for common sense. And for nature. You thought you could bury a creek under concrete like it was an eyesore. Now everyone here is paying the price. People started nodding. Others glared at Karen. The tide was turning. Just then, the double doors opened and two men in county uniforms stepped inside. They carried clipboards and wore the grim expressions of bureaucrats who had seen this too many times before. Ladies and gentlemen, one of them said, we've been asked to investigate the flooding event last week. Our preliminary findings are clear. Your homeowners association illegally altered a natural waterway without permits. The drainage modifications do not meet county standards. Karen's jaw dropped. That's impossible! We hired contractors, licensed contractors. The inspector shook his head. Licensed or not, this project violated floodplain regulations. You obstructed the creek, reduced capacity, and created a public hazard. The flooding was not due to unusual rainfall. It was caused by your modifications. The room exploded with noise. Shouts, curses, demands. Some people turned on Karen instantly. What did you do, Karen? You told us this would increase property values. My insurance won't pay a dime. Karen slammed the gavel, her hands shaking. Calm down! Everyone calm down! But no one was calm. The inspector raised his voice. Here's what happens next. The HOA will be fined for the illegal alteration. Furthermore, you will be required to restore the creek to its original state. That means removing the concrete, replacing the natural drainage, and repairing the damage. The estimated cost is substantial. How substantial? A man yelled. The inspector glanced at his clipboard. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Around the room, neighbors stared at one another in horror. Some shouted in anger. Others just sat down hard like the weight of the news had crushed them. I turned toward the door, satisfied. They hadn't listened before. But now, nature and the law were forcing them to. And this was only the beginning of their downfall. The days after the inspector's announcement were like watching a slow-motion collapse. The whole neighborhood had turned into a battlefield of blame. Neighbors who once smiled at each other across manicured lawns now shouted accusations from their porches. Insurance adjusters came and went, shaking their heads, scribbling notes, leaving behind disappointment. Every morning I took my coffee out onto the porch and watched the parade of misery. Trucks hauling away ruined carpet, dumpsters filling with soggy drywall, contractors charging outrageous fees for emergency work. And every morning, I saw Karen storming around, barking orders, trying to hold on to her authority like a queen watching her castle burn. At first, she tried denial. She sent out a community-wide email. The flooding was the result of a once-in-a-century weather event. While we sympathize with the affected homeowners, we must stand united as a community and not cast blame. The walking trail project will continue as planned, with minor adjustments. That email backfired instantly. Within an hour, replies flooded the chain. You're delusional. My entire basement was destroyed. This isn't weather. This is you. We're contacting lawyers. 2 days later, someone printed the county inspector's report and taped it to the mailbox stand for everyone to see. The words were stark. Unauthorized alteration of a natural waterway. Violation of floodplain management ordinances. Responsible party, Lakewood Estates Homeowners Association. By the time I walked down to check my mail, half the neighborhood had read it. People stood in little knots whispering furiously. When Karen appeared, the whispers turned into open shouting. "You told us this was safe. You said the county approved it. Do you have any idea what you've cost us?" Karen raised her hands like a preacher trying to calm a mob. "Please, everyone, we are working on a solution." "A solution?" a man barked. His hair was plastered flat from sweat and exhaustion. "You buried a creek. The only solution is to dig it back up, and we're the ones footing the bill." Her smile faltered, and for the first time, I saw cracks in her mask. That evening, the emergency HOA meeting was held in the hall again. This time, the atmosphere was poisonous. People crowded the aisles, some standing against the walls, arms crossed, faces grim. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and wet shoes. Half the attendees had just come from ripping out their own ruined floors. Karen sat at the front table, pale, but still trying to project authority. She tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could come to order—" "No," someone shouted. "We're not doing this your way anymore," another voice added. "You destroyed our homes. You don't get to gavel us into silence." Karen's lips thinned. "If we are to move forward, we must remain civil. The board has consulted with legal counsel. We face significant fines and mandatory restoration. To cover these expenses, we will need to levy a special assessment." The room erupted. "A special assessment? You mean you want us to pay for your mistake?" "I already spent 50 grand on repairs." Karen's gavel banged desperately, but the noise drowned her out. I stood near the side wall, arms folded, watching the chaos swirl. The neighbors who once praised her now spat her name like a curse. For years she'd ruled this HOA with an iron fist hidden behind a manicured hand. Now the fist was exposed, and no one wanted to bow anymore. One man shoved forward, his face red. "How much?" he demanded. "How much are you trying to bleed us for?" Karen hesitated, glancing at the papers in front of her. "The restoration will cost approximately $300,000, plus fines. Divided among all households, the assessment would be—" She trailed off, clearly dreading the math. "$20,000 per family," someone supplied bitterly. "That's what you're about to say, isn't it?" The silence that followed was worse than shouting. Then the anger came roaring back, louder than before. 20 grand? Are you insane? We don't have that kind of money. I'll sue before I give you a dime." Karen tried to regain control, but every word dug her hole deeper. "This is not optional," she snapped finally. "We are a homeowners association. Our bylaws clearly state that all members must comply with special assessments. Your bylaws don't override the law of nature," I shouted, stepping forward. The room turned toward me, and I felt the weight of their eyes. "You buried a creek. You thought you could pave over water and tell it where to go. Water doesn't listen to bylaws. Water doesn't care about your votes. And now, you're drowning in the mess you made." The crowd broke into murmurs, nods, even applause. Karen's face flushed crimson. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said. "You gambled with everyone's homes to make the neighborhood look prettier on a flyer. And now the bill has come due." The meeting dissolved into shouting again. Some demanded Karen's resignation. Others threatened to contact attorneys as a group. A few stormed out entirely, slamming doors. By the end of the night, the HOA board was in shambles. 2 members resigned on the spot, throwing their papers onto the table and walking away. Karen sat frozen in her chair, staring at the crowd like a queen whose army had abandoned her. Outside, the night air was cool and heavy with the smell of damp earth. I walked home slowly, the sound of angry voices still echoing behind me. The creek, my creek, was still buried, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. Nature would reclaim what belonged to it. The only question was how much more destruction the HOA would endure before it surrendered. Over the next week, surveyors arrived with equipment, measuring the ground, marking spots with orange paint. The county meant business. Heavy machinery would be coming soon, tearing up the concrete trail, ripping out the pipes, restoring the creek. In the meantime, the neighborhood stewed in resentment. Property values plummeted overnight. Real estate listings quietly disappeared. Who wanted to buy into a subdivision famous for flooding and lawsuits? I passed one of the for sale signs one afternoon, half hidden behind a leaning trash bin. The owners stood nearby arguing quietly. The woman's voice trembled. "We can't sell it now. No one will buy. We're stuck here, stuck in a swamp of their own making." Karen tried to hold on to her crown a little longer. She called another meeting, insisting the board could negotiate with the county, maybe reduce the fines, maybe keep part of the trail. Hardly anyone showed up. The few who did sat in stony silence until one man finally told her flat out, "You're finished, Karen. Step down before we throw you out." Her face went white. For a moment, I thought she might cry, but she gathered her papers with shaking hands and walked out without another word. The Queen had fallen. The HOA was leaderless, drowning in debt, and fractured beyond repair. I walked down to the buried creek that evening. Water still seeped out from the edges of the concrete, trickling weakly, fighting to find its way. The sound was faint but insistent, like a whisper. I'm still here, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the creek roared back to life. The demolition started on a Monday morning. I woke to the grinding roar of engines and the metallic clang of equipment. Through my window, I saw the first excavators rolling into the subdivision like a slow-moving army. Yellow machines with wide steel jaws, their arrival announced the end of Lakewood Estate's illusion of perfection. Neighbors stood on their lawns, arms folded, faces tight. Some muttered curses under their breath. Others simply stared in defeat. By mid-morning, the sound of breaking concrete filled the air as the walking trail, the pride of the HOA. Karen's crown jewel was torn to pieces. The ground shuddered as slabs cracked apart, dumped into waiting trucks. Dust hung heavy in the humid air, and beneath it all, faint at first but growing stronger, came the sound of water rushing. The creek was waking up. It had been suffocated under tons of cement and gravel. But water always finds its path. Now, as the machines tore open the burial ground, streams burst free like veins cut open. Cold, clear water surged into the trenches, gurgling, splashing, reclaiming space. By noon, the lowlands of the subdivision were wet again, not with sewage or stagnant swamp water, but with the rightful flow of the creek. I stood at the edge of it all, the sun on my face, watching nature undo months of human arrogance. Some of the HOA members couldn't even bring themselves to look. They turned away, pretending their homes weren't still soggy inside, pretending this wasn't their fault. But others let the sight break them. One woman sank to her knees at the edge of her lawn, her hands covering her face. I couldn't hear what she said over the noise of the machines, but I could imagine prayers, regrets, maybe just sobbing. By the end of that week, the trail was gone. The county ordered the HOA to pay for not only the removal, but also for restoration. Native grasses were planted along the banks. Rocks were placed carefully to slow erosion. The water flowed free again, glittering in the late summer sun. It was as if the creek sighed in relief, stretching out after being bound too tight. But for the homeowners, relief never came. Insurance companies were ruthless. Because the damage was caused by unauthorized alterations, most claims were denied. Families had to pay out of pocket for their ruined basements, their warped floors, their cracked foundations. A few took out loans. A few walked away entirely, abandoning their million-dollar homes like empty shells. The lawsuits came next. Within a month, a group of 20 families filed a class action against the HOA board. Their claim: negligence, mismanagement, fraud. Karen's name was bold in the paperwork, listed as primary responsible party. I got a copy slipped under my door. Someone thought I'd enjoy reading it. They were right. Court filings revealed everything I'd suspected. Karen had pressured the landscaper to speed up the process and minimize county involvement. Emails showed she ignored. Warnings that altering a waterway without permits could have serious consequences. She even wrote, in one exchange, "It's just a little creek. Who cares? No one even uses it." Those words were her undoing. The hearings were brutal. I attended one out of sheer curiosity, sitting in the back while Karen sat at the defendant's table, pale and drawn, her once proud posture collapsed. Lawyers grilled her for hours. Each answer made her look smaller. When asked why she approved the project, she said, "We wanted to improve the community." When asked if she'd consulted environmental engineers, she muttered, "We didn't think it was necessary." When asked if she personally benefited from the project, her silence spoke volumes. Everyone in that room knew the trail was supposed to be her legacy, her monument. Instead, it was her ruin. The HOA, already bled dry by fines and repairs, had no money left for settlements. So they came after individuals. Karen lost her home. 2 board members filed bankruptcy. The subdivision that once boasted itself as exclusive became a cautionary tale whispered about in real estate circles. Property values cratered. Realtors stopped showing homes there at all, and through it all, the creek flowed stronger than ever. Sometimes in the evenings, I walked down its banks. The county had even added a small footbridge, purely functional, nothing flashy. Birds returned. Dragonflies skimmed the water, and the air smelled sweet again instead of swampy. I often thought about how different things could have been. If the HOA had just left it alone, if Karen had respected the natural balance instead of trying to control it. But arrogance is a stubborn disease, and arrogance was exactly what destroyed them. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the water glowed gold, I saw Karen again. I hadn't expected to. Rumor said she'd moved in with a relative in another county. But there she was, standing by the creek, staring down at the water as if it mocked her. She looked older, worn down, her hair streaked with gray she'd once hidden. Her clothes were plain, a far cry from the sharp suits she used to wear to HOA meetings. For a long moment she didn't see me. Then her eyes lifted, met mine. There was no fire left in them, no smugness, just emptiness. "You must be happy," she said quietly. I shrugged. "I'm not unhappy." Her gaze dropped back to the water. "It was supposed to make things better." "It made them worse," I replied. "Because you didn't listen." "Not to the county, not to the warnings, not to the creek." Her lips trembled, and for a moment I thought she might apologize, but she didn't. She turned and walked away, her figure shrinking into the dusk. That was the last time I saw her. Years have passed since then. Lakewood Estates never recovered its prestige. Some houses sit vacant, weeds crawling up their driveways. Others are rented out, cheaper than anyone would have imagined back when the neighborhood was new. The HOA still exists on paper, but it's a skeleton. No one has the energy to enforce petty rules anymore. The creek, though, the creek thrives. It winds through the land like it always has, whispering, laughing, sometimes raging after heavy rains. Kids play on its banks again, their laughter echoing in the air. Wildlife flourishes where once there was only sterile concrete. And me? I sit on my porch, sipping coffee, listening. Because in the end, the creek taught everyone a lesson they should have already known. You can try to bury the truth. You can try to pave over nature, cover up warnings, silence dissent, but the truth always finds a way back. And when it does, it will wash away everything built on arrogance and lies.